All right, Victor, my friend, we gotta talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court. It just feels like, every other week they're dropping something that just makes you scratch your head, right?
Michael, I totally agree. It's quite perplexing, to say the least. Especially when you see how consistently, actually, the lower federal courts, the district judges all across the country, they've been ruling against certain actions by the administration. They say, no, this is illegal, or this is unconstitutional, right? And these are judges from all political stripes, appointed by both parties, might I add.
Yeah, that's what gets me. Like, it's not even a partisan thing at the lower levels sometimes. They're just calling balls and strikes based on the law. But then you see the Supreme Court, and it's like they just, poof, make those rulings disappear, often without any real, public reasoning. What's even happening there?
It's what many are calling the shadow docket, Michael. These emergency applications, they bypass the traditional full appellate process. No oral arguments, often no full briefings. The court acts quickly, and increasingly, they're reversing lower court decisions with just these very brief, unsigned orders. It's quite alarming for the transparency of the judicial process.
Shadow docket. Sounds pretty cloak and dagger, doesn't it? But, is this like a new thing, or has it just, ramped up recently?
It's been around for some time, this process, but the frequency and especially the nature of these interventions has escalated dramatically in recent years. It used to be for truly urgent matters, like imminent executions or very time-sensitive requests. Now it's being used for much broader policy issues, effectively allowing the Supreme Court to make significant policy shifts without full deliberation.
So they're essentially making these huge calls, like, on the fly, without, the deep dives and all the public scrutiny you'd expect from the highest court in the land.
Precisely, Michael. And this is the critical point, Lower courts, they take in evidence, they establish facts, they apply the law diligently. And then the Supreme Court comes along sometimes and just overrules them with barely a word of explanation. It leaves the impression that the decisions are perhaps not always based on the facts presented in the lower courts, but on other considerations.
Other considerations? That's a polite way to put it, I guess. It sounds like it could really undermine public trust, right? If people don't understand why a decision was made, or if it feels arbitrary, that's dangerous.
Absolutely. Trust in the judiciary is paramount for the rule of law to function. When decisions appear to be made in secrecy, without full, reasoned explanations, it erodes that trust. It makes it harder for the public and even other legal professionals to understand the court's legal reasoning and apply it consistently. It's quite unsettling, this trend.
And you mentioned it's affecting major policy issues now. Like what specifically? What's one of the more head-scratching examples that really caught your attention?
Well, there's this recent ruling about immigration enforcement in California. This is a very stark example, my friend. It allows ICE agents to essentially arrest people based on very, very broad and, frankly, discriminatory criteria. It's a real concern for many communities.
Discriminatory criteria? Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. Can you, walk me through that a bit more? What exactly are these criteria and who are they impacting?
Of course. So, the Supreme Court, in this unsigned decision, basically lifted limits on ICE operations in Los Angeles. And the criteria that Justice Kavanaugh cited in his comments were quite revealing, to say the least. It allows agents to target individuals who, and I quote, work or appear to work in jobs such as construction, landscaping, agriculture, or car washes, and do not speak much, if any, English. Think about that, Michael.
Wait, so they can just, stop someone because of what kind of job they do, or if they don't speak English? That sounds an awful lot like racial profiling, doesn't it? I mean, who exactly are they appearing to target with those criteria?
Exactly. It's a thinly veiled mechanism for racial and ethnic profiling. Who do you think predominantly works in construction, landscaping, agriculture, or car washes, and may not speak English as a first language? It's disproportionately targeting Latino and other non-white communities. It's discriminatory against non-white people by design, actually. It's not about immigration status, it's about appearance and perceived socioeconomic status.
That's just wild, Victor. It really hits hard when you put it like that. So basically, if you look a certain way or work a certain job, you're more likely to be stopped and interrogated by ICE, even if you're like a perfectly legal resident or a U.S. citizen?
That is precisely the fear and the reality, actually. It creates this climate of fear and vulnerability for entire communities. It goes against the very idea of equal protection under the law, don't you think? It's quite shocking to see the highest court essentially sanction such practices.
Yeah, it's not just shocking, it's like deeply unsettling. And it really makes you wonder about the integrity of the process. I remember seeing Justice Sotomayor's dissent on this, and she didn't hold back. What did she say?
Justice Sotomayor, she was quite forceful, actually. She wrote, and I quote, "We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. Rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost, I dissent." She really called it out for what it is, a direct threat to the constitutional freedoms of vulnerable populations.
Wow, seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. That's not just a dissent, that's a desperate warning, isn't it? It's so blunt, it leaves no room for misinterpretation. So she's basically saying this isn't just about immigration law, it's about basic human rights and racial discrimination in practice.
Exactly, Michael. It transcends typical immigration policy debates and really highlights the racial and ethnic bias inherent in these broad criteria. It opens the door for widespread discrimination and abuse. For her to be so direct, it underscores the gravity of the situation and the perceived threat to the very fabric of American society.
I can only imagine the impact this has on families and communities. The constant fear, the feeling of being targeted just for existing. It's demoralizing, to say the least.
It is. It creates a chilling effect, actually. People become hesitant to go about their daily lives, to report crimes, to seek medical attention, because they fear these arbitrary stops and potential detention. It's not just about individuals. It's about destabilizing communities and eroding the trust between citizens and law enforcement.
And this is coming from a Supreme Court justice. It's not some, activist on the street. It's a high-level alarm bell, which makes Kavanaugh's counter-argument even more bizarre. So Kavanaugh, he tries to frame these stops as just brief investigative stops to check immigration status. And if someone's a U.S. citizen, they're promptly let go. Sounds all neat and tidy, right? But, is that actually what happens on the ground? Because from what I've seen, it doesn't look like a polite chat over coffee.
Polite chat over coffee, indeed. That is a fantasy, Michael. It's absolutely not factually accurate. Sherilyn Iffel, she described it perfectly, actually, as a sanitized, fantastical version downloaded from a DHS website. We've seen the testimony. We've seen the videos, actually, with our own eyes.
Yeah, I've seen some of those videos. They're pretty intense. Armed agents, tactical gear, sometimes even armored vehicles. It looks more like a military operation than a brief investigative stop.
Exactly. There is no gentle inquiry. We have countless declarations and testimonies from United States citizens, actually, who have been stopped, detained, often handcuffed, even shackled, and held in ICE custody for weeks, sometimes even up to 3 months, despite immediately asserting their citizenship. These are not prompt releases after a quick check. This is deeply disturbing.
That's infuriating, actually. So Kavanaugh's just like completely ignoring the lived experience of people on the ground? It's almost like he's trying to gaslight us into believing something that's clearly not true.
Duh, it's a form of gaslighting, absolutely. It's attempting to impose a narrative that is completely contradicted by the evidence and the reality that is happening in communities all over the country. And it's not just the fear of being taken, it's the actual, tangible harm of being detained, losing jobs, being separated from families, even if you are eventually released.
It makes you wonder if the justices are this out of touch with reality. What does that mean for justice?
Well, it means exactly what you imply. And it's not just the domestic population, Michael. Remember that raid on the EV battery plant in Georgia recently? South Korean nationals, engineers, who were here legally on work visas, actually, they were taken into ICE custody, shackled, their legs and waists bound, handcuffed. This was not a brief investigative stop leading to a prompt release.
Oh, right. I remember that. That was a huge international incident, wasn't it? The South Korean government had to, formally intervene to get their citizens out. That's a whole different level of mess. How do you explain that under Kavanaugh's prompt release idea?
You don't, Michael. You simply do not. It directly refutes his sanitized version of events. These were not undocumented individuals appearing to work low-wage jobs. These were highly skilled professionals here legally, contributing to the economy. And they were treated like hardened criminals. It shows the indiscriminate and aggressive nature of these operations.
So it's not just about who looks Latino or speaks Spanish. It's about a broader, almost indiscriminate use of power then. And it clearly has international implications too, if other governments have to step in.
Exactly. This demonstrates the unchecked power being exercised and actually implicitly endorsed by the Supreme Court in these shadow docket rulings. It's a very dangerous precedent when you have legal residents and even citizens from allied nations being subjected to such treatment based on, well, little more than a fishing expedition by enforcement agents.
And the fact that the Supreme Court's essentially waving this through without a proper, transparent explanation, it's just, wow. It really makes you question their commitment to the actual rule of law, not just the words. So against this backdrop of these really troubling rulings and the obvious disconnect from reality, Justice Amy Coney Barrett says we're not in a constitutional crisis. How do we even reconcile that statement with everything we've just talked about?
Well, Michael, it's quite simple. She's essentially dismissing the profound concerns of her own colleagues, actually. Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, all of whom have described very explicitly the critical constitutional consequences of how this conservative majority is behaving. They see a crisis very clearly.
So she's basically saying, everything's fine here, nothing to see, while her colleagues are shouting from the rooftops that the roof is on fire. That's kind of audacious, isn't it?
Audacious is a very good word, Michael. It's also deeply disrespectful, actually. To dismiss the concerns of justices who are doing the painstaking work of examining facts, evaluating evidence, and then seeing their carefully reasoned decisions overturned without proper explanation, it's telling them their work and their concerns about the Constitution are irrelevant.
And that can't be good for the court itself internally. It's like having a team where some players are openly undermining the others, but the coach says everything's great. It doesn't build confidence.
No, it does not. It creates a profound tension within the judiciary itself. These are federal trial court judges across the country trying to uphold the law, and the Supreme Court is essentially telling them that their judgments can be swept aside almost on a whim. And to deny that this creates a crisis in judicial governance or constitutional interpretation is, well, to deny what we are all seeing.
Yeah, it feels like they're trying to convince us that black is white sometimes. It's frustrating as heck.
Duh, Michael, you feel it, I feel it, many feel it. This constant disjunction between what the court describes and what actually occurs on the ground, or what is apparent through the dissenters' arguments. It profoundly erodes public trust, you know? When the highest court is perceived as operating on a different plane of reality, it's dangerous for democracy.
Dangerous, absolutely. I mean, if people lose faith in the judiciary, what's left? It's supposed to be the final arbiter, the one place you can go when everything else fails. If that's compromised, then, well, the whole system starts to wobble, right?
It's a foundational pillar. When you have justices offering fantastical versions of events or dismissing fundamental constitutional concerns as non-crises, it looks like political maneuvering, not impartial justice. And that's the perception, actually, that is so damaging. It makes the court appear politicized, like just another branch pursuing an agenda, rather than upholding the law.
Yeah, and that gaslighting you mentioned earlier, Victor, is not just annoying, it's a tactic. It makes you question your own judgment, your own eyes. And that's seriously messed up when it's coming from the Supreme Court.
It is indeed. It's an attempt to control the narrative, to dictate reality, even when that reality is contrary to established facts and even the very evidence presented in court. But fortunately, we have voices like Cheryl and Iffel and the dissenting justices who are prepared to tell us what actually is going on. They won't let us be gaslit, actually.
So what's the long-term prognosis here? If this continues, if these shadow docket decisions keep coming, if these real-world impacts keep piling up, and the court just keeps denying any crisis, where does that leave us as a country?
It leaves us actually in a very precarious position. The principle of the rule of law relies on consistent application and public faith in its impartiality. When the Supreme Court undermines lower courts, acts without transparency, and appears to sanction discriminatory practices, it damages its legitimacy. This opens the door to greater instability and public cynicism about justice itself.
So we're essentially looking at a future where the highest court might be seen as less about justice and more about power plays. That's a grim thought, Victor.
It is a grim thought, Michael, but it's one we must confront. The erosion of constitutional freedoms, particularly for non-white communities, through decisions like the ICE raid ruling, is a very serious issue. It's not just a legal technicality. It's about real people, real lives, and the core values of our democracy.
And it makes the fight for civil rights and equal protection even more vital than, wouldn't you say? Because if the courts aren't protecting these rights, who will?
Absolutely. It puts a greater onus on advocacy, on public awareness, and on elected officials to provide oversight. The dissenting justices are, in a way, calling on the public to understand what is happening, to pay attention, and to hold institutions accountable. Because if we don't, then these alarming trends could become deeply entrenched, actually.
Well, you know what? We are seeing what we are seeing. And no matter what anyone tries to tell us, it's clear there are some serious issues at play. Victor, this has been enlightening, if a bit, well, disheartening.
It is always my pleasure, Michael. It's crucial conversations like this that bring these issues into the light, even when they are uncomfortable. The struggle for justice, it continues, my friend.
You know, Victor, something that really sticks with me is this whole idea of gaslighting from the bench. When Justice Kavanaugh paints this picture of brief investigative stops and prompt releases, but we all know, or at least we've seen, the reality is starkly different. It's just, well, it's dishonest, isn't it? And from a Supreme Court justice, that's troubling.
It is, Michael, deeply troubling. The judiciary, it relies on its moral authority, its perceived objectivity. When a justice articulates a version of events that is demonstrably false, actually, and contradicts the very evidence presented in lower courts, it calls into question the integrity of the entire institution.
How can citizens trust their rulings if they appear disconnected from reality, or worse, actively misrepresent it?
And when you layer that with Justice Barrett just shrugging off the idea of a constitutional crisis despite her colleagues' dire warnings, it almost feels like a coordinated effort to downplay the significance of their actions. Do you know what I mean?
I do. It creates this narrative that dissenters are simply overreacting, perhaps being overly dramatic, while the majority is just calmly applying the law. But the reality, as we have discussed, is that the majority is making very swift, often unexplained, decisions with profound consequences, particularly for non-white communities. And then they try to dismiss any concern as unfounded. It's a dangerous game, actually.
It really is. And the legal community, they must be watching this with bated breath, right? I mean, it must feel like the rules are changing, and not for the better.
The legal community is absolutely concerned, Michael. This shadow docket approach, the lack of reasoned opinions, the apparent disregard for established facts from lower courts, it makes the law less predictable, less stable. And that makes it harder for lawyers to advise clients, for lower courts to make consistent rulings. It introduces an element of arbitrary power that is truly unsettling for legal professionals.
So we're talking about direct, tangible harm to real people, often just based on how they look or where they work, right? And then you have the court almost minimizing that with these sanitized descriptions. It feels like a complete disregard for the human element.
It is, Michael. It is a profound disregard. The human cost of these decisions is immense. Imagine being a U.S. citizen, actually, going about your daily life, and suddenly you are stopped, interrogated, and detained just because you look Latino, or speak Spanish, or work in a certain industry. The psychological impact, the financial burden, the disruption to families, it's devastating.
And the fact that the court is allowing this to continue, essentially giving a green light to practices that many see as inherently discriminatory against non-white people, it just feels like a step backwards for civil rights in this country.
It absolutely is a step backward, actually. It undoes decades of progress in establishing protections against racial profiling and arbitrary state power. It normalizes a level of surveillance and suspicion based on immutable characteristics or common labor, which is very, very dangerous for a diverse democracy.
So when Barrett says we're committed to the rule of law, but the dissenters and external commentators are saying these actions are actually eroding the rule of law, there's a pretty big chasm there, isn't there? They're not even speaking the same language.
They are not, Michael. It's a fundamental disagreement on the definition and application of the rule of law itself. For some, it means strict adherence to certain textual interpretations, even if it leads to these profoundly negative social consequences. For others, like the dissenting justices, the rule of law must safeguard fundamental rights and ensure equal treatment for all, irrespective of race, language, or occupation.
It seems like this is going to be a battle for the soul of the judiciary, really. Victor, this targeting based on appearance for ICE stops, it strongly reminds me of stop and frisk laws. Is this Supreme Court ruling similar to those controversial measures passed in some states for crime reduction?
Michael, the parallels are deeply unsettling. While the stated goal differs, the methodology and impact are strikingly similar. Both empower agents to use broad, subjective criteria like appearance or perceived socioeconomic status, which demonstrably lead to racial profiling and disproportionate targeting of non-white communities.
So it's essentially profiling, but now sanctioned by the highest court for immigration enforcement?
Precisely. It legitimizes a tactic that sidesteps individualized suspicion, replacing it with demographic characteristics. This is a profound erosion of Fourth Amendment protections and equal treatment under the law. It's the same playbook with different consequences.
And the long-term impact on civil liberties will be just as damaging.
Absolutely. It fosters a climate of fear and vulnerability, actually undermining the very trust essential for a functioning democracy. It sets a very dangerous precedent.
So, Victor, if we zoom out a bit, Cheryl and Iffel called this Supreme Court decision a watermark in the dissolution of what we had come to believe we had a right to expect as citizens in a democracy. That's a pretty heavy statement, isn't it? It's not just about one ruling, it's about the bigger picture.
Da, Michael, it is a very profound observation. It speaks to the slow chipping away at fundamental democratic principles. When citizens can be targeted based on appearance, or if their legal protections are suddenly vulnerable to arbitrary decisions from the highest court, it fundamentally changes the nature of citizenship. It becomes conditional, actually, for some.
Conditional citizenship. That's a scary thought. It makes you feel like the ground underneath you isn't as solid as you thought. And this is all happening while, some insist there's no constitutional crisis. It's almost surreal.
It is deeply unsettling. The very definition of a constitutional crisis, it implies a fundamental breakdown in the functioning of government or the protection of constitutional rights. And when justices themselves are sounding the alarm, pointing to blatant disregard for established legal principles and the rights of citizens, and others deny it, it's a very clear indication that something is profoundly amiss.
And the idea that these decisions are made without proper explanation through the shadow docket just compounds that feeling of things being out of control or, less democratic.
Absolutely. Transparency and reasoned deliberation are hallmarks of a healthy democracy and a legitimate judiciary. When these are abandoned for expediency or political ends, it sends a very clear signal that the rules are changing, and often not in favor of democratic accountability or individual rights. It's a direct imperilment of the democratic ideal, actually.
So, we've got to keep watching, keep talking about it, because, silence isn't going to fix anything, is it? Now, it certainly isn't, and it's on us then to keep this conversation alive, to keep bringing these issues to the light. Because if we don't, who will? It really feels like the stakes couldn't be higher here, Victor.
Da, Michael, the stakes are immensely high. And your point about silence is absolutely correct. It's through these open discussions, actually, that we can counter the narratives that seek to distort reality.
Indeed. And on that note, we're almost out of time for this segment. But the conversation, as always, continues beyond our microphones. Victor, it's been another profound discussion.
Always, Michael. Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners for joining in. And thanks for spreading the word about our channel. And we'll see y'all later.
Precisely, Michael. Silence is not an option here. The consequences of these decisions, particularly their discriminatory impact on non-white communities, are too severe to ignore. The path forward, it demands constant vigilance, actually, and persistent advocacy. It requires citizens to be informed, to understand the implications of these judicial actions.
So, what does accountability even look like in this situation? I mean, the Supreme Court, they're not elected. They don't have term limits. It's not like you can just vote them out.
That's a very difficult question, actually. Accountability for the Supreme Court is indirect by design, but it comes through public pressure, through academic critique, through legislative oversight, and even through the actions of lower courts and other legal institutions. When the public's trust is eroded, when critical voices, including those within the court, speak out, it creates pressure for change. It's slow, but it's essential, actually.
So it's about shining a light on it, basically, making sure everyone sees what's happening, even if the court itself doesn't want to explain it.
Exactly. As Sherilyn Iffel concluded, we are seeing what we are seeing. We must insist on that truth, actually. We must not allow ourselves to be convinced that what is plainly happening is not happening. This is the first step in restoring any semblance of justice and integrity to the system.
Well, Victor, I appreciate you breaking this all down. It's a lot to chew on, and frankly, pretty disheartening stuff sometimes, but absolutely necessary to discuss. Thanks for walking us through this.
Always a pleasure, Michael. These conversations are vital. Until next time.
You know, Victor, I said we'd see our listeners later, but something's still sitting with me from our earlier discussion. We talked about how silence isn't an option.
Michael, and it is precisely that point that weighs heavily. To simply close out without further emphasizing it, it would be a disservice.
Right, because if we just see you later and don't underscore what's at stake, especially with the gaslighting from the court, it feels like we're letting it slide.
Exactly. The illusion of a resolved discussion is dangerous when the underlying issues are so pressing, so unresolved. We must reiterate the imperative of vigilance, actually.
So this isn't just about what the court is doing, but how we as a society react to it, or rather,